Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Building Meaningful Brand Relationships with LATINXs. I'm your moderator, Zoe Fernandez. Before I introduce today's speaker and we get to the webinar content, I'd like to share some information about M8 as well as some key housekeeping items for you to keep in mind throughout today's presentation. Audio for today's webinar is streamed live through your computer speakers. Please ask questions throughout the webinar as we'd love to hear from you. And we'll dedicate the last 10 minutes of our time here today to get into as many of your questions as possible. To ask a question, please submit them by clicking on the Q&A icon on your screen, entering your question and hitting send. If we don't get to your question, we will follow up with you in the coming days. And if you'd like to revisit today's webinar, a recorded version will be available to you. Resources related to this webinar content can be found at the bottom of your screen. Please take a look to learn more. To lead today's webinar, we are joined by Jonathan Zinger, SVP Media Insights at M8. Over the past 13 years, Jonathan, together with his team, has helped brands connect and build relationships with multicultural consumers. And for those of you who are not familiar with M8, we specialize in multicultural marketing with particular care of the Latinx consumer for over the past 20 years. M8 is a team of creative, multicultural, multi-screen marketers who combine storytelling, insights, and technology to create experiences that connect brands with consumers in the connected area. Now over to Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Zoe. Hello, everyone. As Zoe mentioned, we'll be discussing today a topic that's very, very dear and I'm very passionate about, which is how to build deeper brand relationships with Latino consumers in the U.S. At the end of this brief presentation, what I'd like to leave you with are three main takeaways. On one end, an initial understanding of the importance of Latinos in the U.S. overall growth, including some comments on how the current crisis is affecting them, and also on how to capitalize on some opportunity over this crisis. Some ideas also on how to connect at a deeper, more significant level with Latinos in your brand communication. And finally, how to affect business results and help future-proof your brand throughout this relationship building. So I'd like to begin with a little bit of a feel of the group and a poll. And I'd like to ask you if your marketing plans currently include some form of Latino-specific messaging or targeting. So I'll give you a few seconds to answer these questions, and then we'll move on. So we see that around 75% of you are currently engaging in some form of Latino-specific messaging or targeting, while 25% of you are not, and that gives me an idea of the audience that we are engaging with. And I'd like to take this opportunity to connect this with the current COVID-19 crisis and how it affects specifically U.S. Latinos and what companies are doing as a response to that. By all means, this is not a presentation about the COVID-19 crisis, but at the same time, any business conversation today is in a way a conversation about this crisis. So that's why I'd like to start by pointing out a few highlights on what we are seeing within the Latino experience under this context. Some of the pain points of being a Latino in the U.S., including xenophobia and also suffering the distance from family and loved ones, are being really exacerbated by this crisis. And additionally, many Latinos are being affected by what we could call a deprioritization of in-language and in-culture messaging, which matters more than ever actually in a context where they need to receive very clear communication and assistance. However, it's not all bad news. Almost 60% of marketers like you seem to be implementing or preparing Hispanic outreach programs. However, this is yet far from the general market benchmark. And these represent an opportunity for brands that take action soon. So towards the end of this presentation, we'll discuss some factors that we consider to be key to address Latinos during this very particular crisis. We tend to say that multicultural is the new normal, and according to U.S. Census projections, since April 2020, over half of U.S. children are part of the minority race or ethnic group. And the results of the last U.S. Census in April of 2010 also reflected a significant increase of the U.S. Latino population. So from a marketing point of view, this resulted in massive quote-unquote discovery of the Hispanic market segment by brands and marketers as well. And this time, there's a big opportunity to be ahead of that curve. We all know that a new multicultural majority will be unveiled on 2020. And we believe that Latinos will stop being perceived as a quote-unquote market niche. And brands will understand their need to integrate multicultural segments, including Latinos, into their strategies from the very get-go. The Latino growing buying power is really increasing at an exponential rate, and it has increased from $494 billion to $1.5 trillion over the last 8 years, and this represents a percentage increase of over 206%, which is 36% higher than the total U.S. buying power increase of 152%. So what I'm trying to say is that Latinos are growing in their buying power at a much higher rate than the overall U.S. population. Of course, these trends will all be deeply affected by the 2020 crisis, as we just mentioned. But the Latino market size and buying power will continue to require a very thoughtful understanding of what this audience represents to a company's bottom line. Beyond purchase power, the influence of Latinos in the U.S. culture has recently hit new milestones. For instance, let's think for a second about the last Super Bowl halftime show. I think it was a testament to the crucial impact of Latinos and Latinas in particular in the U.S. culture. Latino entertainment is going mainstream, and according to Forbes, in 2019, Latin music became a more popular medium in the U.S. than country music and EDM. So let's ponder for a second over what that fact entails in terms of sheer cultural impact of this crucial growing segment. So what should a brand's response to this multicultural reality be? At M8, we consider multicultural marketing to be a facilitator of deeper brand-consumer relationships. The foundation for this relationship building is the acknowledgement and recognition of people's cultural traits. In a few minutes, we'll discuss some ideas on how to facilitate these relationships, including some very tangible business examples. Before we do so, I'd like to ask a question to the group, which is, do you think that multicultural marketing falls within the diversity and inclusion umbrella? And I'll give you a few seconds to answer that. So it seems that we have a split opinion here. 40% of you believe that multicultural marketing falls within the diversity and inclusion umbrella, and 60% of you believe that it doesn't. And I'll tell you a little bit about our views. When we talk about multiculturality, we think that we necessarily tackle the topic of diversity and inclusion. But at the same time, diversity and inclusion marketing and multicultural marketing are definitely not synonyms. Multicultural marketing allows for solid brand building, we think, based on the recognition of a set of diverse traits in people, and its inclusion in overall business strategies, which should ideally help facilitate inclusion in society as well. So multicultural marketing definitely does not equate inclusion marketing, but showing multicultural consumers that our brand recognizes and cares about them is a way of building stronger brand relationships through inclusion. So in a way, what I'm trying to say is that good multicultural marketing is inclusive in its essence. This is a joke that we usually make inside the team, which is Latinos over-index for over-indexing. So according to Nielsen data, Latinos are trendsetters and tastemakers across a very varied range of categories. Everything from food and beverage to beauty products. They are culture-driven shoppers who over-index for a wide range of business categories. And they are also extremely connected and mobile. Latinos tend to use their smartphones and other devices at higher rates and more intensely than their non-Hispanic counterparts. And they tend to be ahead of the curve of adoption for many forms of communication, like many newer social networks. So they usually spearhead a lot of different trends. Leaning into these trends and ensuring that your brand is culturally relevant can bring new audiences to your brand, help establish a differentiation based on deeper, longer-lasting customer relationships, and can also help future-proof your business, all of which naturally represents growth. One of the main jeopardies that we see in multicultural advertising is that many brands are taking a very generic approach towards multicultural. And they are not necessarily understanding that generic hurts. As a Latino, when you face poor direct translations and experiences, when you're exposed to messaging that doesn't represent you, or worse, makes a caricature out of you, when you feel unacknowledged or oversimplified by a brand, it hurts your perception of that brand. In other words, multicultural marketing done wrong is not neutral, it's negative. In a nutshell, we think that multicultural people want to feel acknowledged, recognized, and understood by brands. And brands that don't take account of this jeopardize their growth. So one final question for you guys. Do you think that the best way to reach Latinos in the U.S. in terms of language is to Spanish, English, Spanglish, so the combination of Spanish and English within the same terms and places, or a combination of all of the above? I'll give you a few seconds to respond. So most of you definitely feel that the right answer is a combination of it all, and I would tend to agree. And I would add that there are some preconceptions on Latinos today that we believe have been misorienting marketers. So we think that one of those preconceptions has to do with this very topic, the use of language. Something that we've identified and I made through our research is that in time, as immigrants from Latin America arrive to the U.S. and they build their families in the country, the relationships between these segments and language has evolved from what we used to call language dominance, for instance, when we refer to a Spanish-dominant Latino or an English-dominant Latino, to unique language journeys. As generations progress, the use of English language by Latinos become more predominant, and this is a natural fact that's observed by most marketers. However, taking a closer look, as you can see on the chart on this slide, we can notice how most of them still sustain a daily use of Spanish language at some point of their day. In this chart, you can see that even when it's safe to say that most Latinos in the U.S. could be qualified as English dominant, over half of them choose at least some Spanish when they're online. And that proportion changes on different activities like listening to audio content. Long-form audio content tends to be predominantly in Spanish for Latino consumers, or even interacting at home, which you can see how over 80% of Latinos choose at least some Spanish as they go about their day. And these language journeys are as unique as every individual, and they need to be tackled as such. So let's take a hypothetical example to illustrate this, like Laura here. And her name is actually pronounced Laura or Laura alternatively as the day goes by. And this is not a minor fact, because she switches on and off in terms of language and also in terms of culture. So a second and third generation Hispanic like Laura, in this example, may start her day in a multi-generational household in which she speaks in Spanish with some family members, for instance, her grandfather. She may commute to her workplace while listening to long-form audio content in Spanish, browse the news in English, scroll through her social feed that has both English and Spanish language content from friends, and arrive to a workplace in which she'll prepare an English language presentation while exchanging with a coworker in Spanish. So as we mentioned, language paths are as unique as every individual, and this is something that needs to be recognized and addressed by brands. To illustrate with a case study the importance of considering language beyond translation, I'd like to mention some work that we did for our client General Mills, actually with our client General Mills. Our client need had to do with the fact that bicultural Latina moms and foodies were over-indexing in almost 20 General Mills brands consumption, and nobody was really engaging directly with them. So we thought, how can these brands create an emotional bond to embrace and grow these audience? And feeling that something that we consider a very important content gap for a fast-growing Latina mom audience, we transformed the brand into a publisher through an online portal called Que Rica Vida, or What a Yummy Life in English. One way we identified how language is situational in action was when we analyzed Latin American recipe consumption on this portal. So something that we found was that while English users of the site were connecting with their roots, so they were mostly Latinas that were browsing for dishes they had heard of or wanted to try, Spanish users were taking action. They mostly knew the dishes very well and were trying to get very precise details on how to perfect them. So the content needed to shift based on the fact that language also indicated a lot on what these users of the sites were after and what the relationship with culture and these very same recipes differed from one another. Another crucial element of building deeper relationship with Latinos has to do with cultural cues. Something that we are seeing is that the impact of culturally aware advertising goes beyond Latino segments that have the lowest levels of what we used to call acculturation. In other words, when a brand is categorized as a quote-unquote brand that understands me by a Latino consumer, there's increased loyalty, organic amplification, and even out-of-category consideration. So care, acknowledgement, and recognition pays off even for the most quote-unquote acculturated segments. And it can help your brand differentiate and create trust and care for that brand in return. And as we mentioned before, a generic approach can become detrimental for your brand. By connecting with consumers at a cultural level, marketers can achieve more than an increase in brand consideration and sales. As you can see in this chart, consideration of cultural values and background is higher on multicultural segments, but very particularly in the case of Latinos, with around 60% of the population stating that advertising made for them reflects their cultural background and, most importantly, their cultural values. And in this context, we discussed how many Latinos' relationship with language has a deep emotional component. And there are many other aspects of relationship building with Latinos where emotion becomes central. Latinos are usually very much in touch with their emotions and allow them to permeate throughout their lives. So this represents an opportunity for brands to tackle marketing strategies from a different angle, one that's focused on care and recognition, to differentiate and build longer lasting relationships. And I'd like to take you through a couple of examples of the emotional dimension of cultural cues that I believe are well reflected in two campaigns that we put together with our client Sprint. The first of these campaigns is called La Futbolera, and it has to do with sports, but tackled from a very different angle. As most of you will know, soccer is key when it comes to Latino audiences, and you definitely want to call it football when addressing them. There's a common preconception of soccer having an almost all-male fan base amongst Latinos, and it's important to consider that this is not the case. According to our research, 35% of Latino soccer fans are female. Particularly in the U.S., it has a great female football practice. So we also consider that the soccer ties to the Latino community go beyond the hardcore fan experience. Football can be a way to keep a bond with your country of origin, or your parents' or your grandparents' country of origin. You may only become a football fan during the World Cup, or even when a particular team does well. There's an opportunity for brands to tap a much larger Latino base than hardcore football fans. So based on this insight, we built this sassy, human-like chatbot personality, and she was the first conversational gaming platform in Sprint's social marketing platforms. And she overall killed it. And this was a character-driven campaign led by an all-known football expert, abuela, or grandmother. And I like this campaign very much because I also believe that we subverted the concept of soccer fan from both a gender and age perspective. And the idea that soccer equals young male was challenged to something that feels a lot more intimate to Latinos everywhere. So I think that this is a very powerful case of how we got to build a deeper connection with Latinos. Another example also from Sprint that I think shows the deep impact of cultural cues from a very different perspective is a campaign that was called Altarcitos, and it relates to Dia de los Muertos, the Mexican Day of the Dead. Day of the Dead, like many holidays, has become highly trivialized. We try to differentiate by creating an engagement strategy that was based on tenderness and respect. Mexican culture doesn't regard Day of the Day with sadness, but rather with celebration and altars full of offerings. For that reason, 3 years in a row, we brought the altars online, evolving the artistic approach year after year, and prompting people to share their digital altars on social networks, which was a place where they already share a great part of their lives. And I think that this campaign is particularly interesting because the ability to take risks, like putting together a successful campaign based on something as sensitive as deceased loved ones, showcases the importance and the opportunity in cultural cues. Risks of brands being generic and inattentive versus the rewards of being caring and sensitive. At the end of the day, and more from a pure performance point of view, the multicultural factor in media is that additional risk that we can expect when we are being culturally relevant. And in many occasions, this is a powerful optimization factor that increases performance beyond all traditional optimization levers. You can optimize your marketing budget, create better channel distribution, and improve every element inside your campaigns and tactics. However, cultural relevance can bring you a performance increase that's incremental over all of the above. Being perceived as a brand that quote-unquote understands me is likely to help boost performance at every stage of the funnel. And most importantly, this growth is longer lasting than other improvements and optimizations. One additional aspect of Latino marketing planning that I'd like to discuss today has to do with media buying. Latinos clearly over-index for digital media, and a lot of brands will tend to place a great deal of importance on digital. Some of the key considerations when balancing media buying for Latino audiences have to do with creating a balance and a flow between specialized media and audience targeting. There are great Latino publishers and networks to work with, but at the end of the day, those publishers and networks will only allow you to reach a certain segment of your Latino market. Targeting based on audiences or even then people-based marketing can allow you to reach more niche Latino segments and complete a more sophisticated plan. As we discussed, the relationship between Latinos and language and culture is situational, and it flows as they go about their day and as they go about their life. So it's important to make sure that you're determining relevant moments to approach people with your in-language and in-culture communication. Something quite important for Latino immigrants is to consider non-U.S. Latin American publishers. So when putting together a media strategy for this audience, you should consider country of origin and the top relevant brand safe sites in those countries and target the U.S. population to reach expats. Paid social is growing in its ability to target specific segments and subsegments of the Latino audience. So there's an opportunity for sophistication of strategies here as well. In search in particular, language governance is crucial to balancing elements like browser settings, language and keywords, including keywords that are not exactly in a certain language, like brand names, for instance, or even Spanglish terms. You should determine strict search governance to avoid overlap. With that, you can take advantage of the fact that non-English keywords tend to be more cost efficient than English keywords. One additional topic that I'd like to address before we start to wrap up has to do with the way marketing is evolving, and which represents another opportunity for brands that want to build deeper relationships with Latinos. The evolution of marketing technology is allowing for new ways to build brand relationships, and we could dissect this evolution of engagement with consumers into three broad phases. I think it all started with a long phase of marketing interruption, in which we imposed our message on unexpected people. Then came the permission phase, and this is when we decided to ask people who they are and what they need before approaching them with a more relevant messaging. And finally, then there's the assistance phase. By now, we have more data than ever on what people want, so marketers can anticipate consumer needs and desires to enhance their agenda. Traditional TV advertising is probably a staple of the first phase of interaction, while probably search marketing has been, and probably continues to be, a prime example of the phase of permission. Which practice do we think represents the third phase of assistance the best? Right now, we believe that digital assistants in any of their formats, so from Amazon Alexa and Siri to Google Home to smaller omnipresent chatbots and even outdated wizards, represent clear prototypes of what enhancing the consumer agenda will mean. And we are far from that in this evolution, but we believe that Latinos in the U.S. are particularly prepared for the age of assistance, and there's an opportunity for brands that look to address the need for assistance in these specific segments, particularly in the context of the COVID-19 crisis, where the usage of these platforms has increased. According to Siemens data, U.S. Hispanics are 19% more likely to use the Alexa companion app on their smartphone, and they already seem to interact conversationally with the digital world to a higher degree than non-Hispanics. For instance, they are much more likely to be heavier users of messaging apps. And this may even sound a little bit outdated, but it's interesting under this context. Latinos have always been power users of answer sites like Answers.com or Yahoo Answers. Even when these sites may feel less than modern, it seems clear that the question and answer dynamic feels like a very natural interface with Hispanics. So we stand before a new opportunity here, one where we as marketers, instead of responding to needs presented to us, proactively introduce solutions to enhance people's agendas. As with many other trends before this one, Latinos are there to spearhead the movement. So, to recap, what is the impact of all of this for your brands? What does this all mean at the end of the day? As most brands compete in features, price, and overall positioning, a solid multicultural strategy will allow marketers to break through the clutter and establish value through culture-based differentiators. Because Latino consumers want to feel acknowledged and recognized beyond brands just speaking their language, when brand-consumer relationships are based on common cultural grounds, they tend to last longer and become harder to break. As U.S. demographics evolve towards a multicultural majority, the concept of quote-unquote general market, we think, will progressively fade away. Brands that understand and act on this new reality will be much better equipped for the near future. Also, a solid Latino marketing approach can help brands gain more than just market share. Cultural identification can help pre-motivate consumers that are not currently in the brand's consumer journey. The cultural relevance will also tend to increase amplification, and this all has a very direct impact on the bottom line. In essence, when we consider Latinos as a crucial portion of the new multicultural majority in the U.S., implementing cultural relevance can help brands establish new differentiation terrains, build longer-term relationships with consumers, become better equipped for the future landscape, and increase overall revenue. As I mentioned before we wrap up, I wanted to quickly go back to the topic of the current crisis and highlight some thoughts on Latino brand relationship building under this context. As you can see on this chart, as usual, Latinos are ahead of the adoption curve once again. In this case, over-indexing on how they've grown their media consumption, particularly on digital channels. In-language is turning into a need, not simply a nice-to-have, as information becomes more crucial and it needs to be way more clear. Authentic brand communication becomes something that's, again, more important than ever. Trust is built on acknowledgement and a common ground, and it's important to note that any data that we hold needs to be revised, revisited, and updated. No habits will stay 100% the same. And finally, and probably most importantly, care and empathy matter more than ever, and brands need to show it in their messaging, but also in their actions. The resilience of Latinos, their historical ability to bounce back from turmoil, is probably their strongest asset. Brands that prioritize and assist them have a lot to win, both now and in the future. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll now be responding any of your questions.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for sharing that great content with us. It does look like we've received some questions. As a reminder, if you do have any additional questions, there is time to submit them still through the Q&A icon on your screen. So I'm going to jump straight in here. So the first question is, can we apply some of the rules of marketing to Hispanics to other multicultural segments?
I'm sorry, I had a hard time understanding the question. Maybe Zoe, you can repeat it or type it in the team chat.
Sure. The question's around applying the rules that you apply to Hispanic marketing. Should they be applied to other multicultural segments as well?
Oh, absolutely. So the answer is yes and no. The multicultural segments are really not comparable, and the same rationale shouldn't be applied across segments at all. However, I believe that the notion of speaking the culture instead of just shifting language or shifting imagery, that's a constant across multicultural segments. So there's a rationale of how to go about it that stays the same, but you should never consider multicultural segments as comparable to one another.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So another question that we've had, how do we convince our agency that media dollars should be spent with Latina partners? Well,
that's a difficult question, just because I don't think that you should go about convincing your agency of spending your dollars with any type of partners. At the end of the day, I don't know if this question was submitted by someone on the brand side, but if you're on the brand side, you probably need to work with your agency to define what your audience is. And if you determine that Latinos are part of your audience, there's definitely no convincing to do of where your agency should spend your media dollar. As for anyone that's trying to make the case for Latinos needing to be a part of the brand's marketing budget, I think that some of the things that we've expressed in terms of just the importance of Latinos in sheer buying power growth and in sheer volume of the U.S. population should be enough for them to be considered as part of the marketing mix. and the fact that we are seeing across the board for Spanish dominant, English dominant, however you want to define them, we are seeing the need for culturally relevant communication. I think it makes a case for most brands having a separate, attentive strategy to Latino communication and marketing.
Great, thank you. Another question that's come in, how important do you think it is to have marketing teams have members of the same subculture we're targeting, for example, Latinas?
Well, I would say that it's pretty important. I wouldn't say that you need to have a member of your target audience within a team necessarily to be able to tackle that target audience. But at the same time, I think we've expressed how for Latinos, authenticity is key in the communication, and a generic approach or an inattentive approach always hurts. So there is this sort of quote-unquote for us, by us mentality in terms of how communication is received, and it's much easier to achieve that for us, by us feeling with Latino members of the team. But we need to avoid definitely having token Hispanics within our organization. So we want that authenticity to be driven by true leadership from these Latino members of the team.
Great, thank you. Another question here. How should Gen Z be marketed to at this time? What are your thoughts?
That's a very interesting question, because the common knowledge, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, is that as generations progress, people become more acculturated. So in a way, we would think that a Latino Gen Z is much more similar to anyone in the general audience of the U.S. population for Gen Z, and they have way less contact with the Latino background or roots. And this may be the case comparing to some of the older generations. But at the same time, that's something that we see again and again on our research, is that the ties back to Latino culture are always there, because these are kids that tend to live in multi-generational households in which they engage with other Latino family members that may speak more frequently in Spanish. But other than the Spanish versus English language debate, they will very much tend to be enticed by a communication that recognizes and acknowledges Latinos, not because necessarily they feel that it's addressing them specifically, but they feel that it's addressing their communities, and they place an importance on the brand based on that. At least on our experience and on the campaigns that we put together for Gen Z, that's what we are regarding.
Great, thank you. Another question here is coming around music streaming. Do you have any thoughts around that? Have you done any research or work with music streaming?
Yes. Music is quite central in Latino life in the U.S. in particular. And they, as we make the joke about the Latinos over-indexing for over-indexing, they tend to over-index for music streaming as well. We've seen Pandora taking the lead in terms of Latino engagement and usage of streaming platforms. But across the board, we think that music is a great way to connect with Latinos. And the other way around, Latinos are connecting with the U.S. culture with music, as I was mentioning, the case of Latin music being right now more popular than country music and EDM. So it's a sort of back and forth interaction between this segment and overall culture.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. So that's all the time we have for questions today. I want to thank everyone for joining us. And as a reminder, you will receive an email in the coming days with a link to this webinar on demand if you'd like to revisit the content. I'd like to thank Jonathan for sharing the content with us today and for each of you for joining us.